Go ahead.
And in particular, about the play of your two quarterbacks?
Play of both Will and Drew. I would say, we had the slow start there with the first group. I think the obvious statistical everybody want to talk about is the two interceptions. I think it's the thing I wrote down on my notes a few times during the game was just the execution details. I think just to use last week as a comparable, we were able to make big plays and had a lot of production that overcame, a lot of our mistakes, particularly penalties. And we have mistakes, particularly on those two plays that we didn't overcome. That led to, both those decisions and so forth. So I think if I'm looking for one clean way to explain the production of, going down from 8 days ago today, the details in the execution wasn't as high.
You're trying to hit Roman, it looked like, in both of those.
Correct.
Was Roman in the right spot for both of those, or is that some of what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, there's always plays that are cleaner than others, and those two plays were not clean.
Coach Caleb Johnson played a lot more this game. How did you feel that he played?
Well, I was trying to give him some opportunities. I thought he did. He didn't get a whole lot last week. We're trying to balance things out. I think. I don't know how close you follow. We're trying to move guys around. Trying to you're calling concepts based off of who's in there, even in the passing game. But yeah, I thought he did a nice job between tackles. I thought he bounced the ball. Was able to get him in the perimeters a few times, but it was a conscious effort to just to give him some more opportunities. Probably more than didn't balance out with the other guys. So we got to make up for that in Buffalo, because I want to make sure all those backs get their chances.
Mike, you rotated different guys a couple of times on the right side of the offensive line. What were your initial thoughts?
It just goes back to the first time you asked me about play time. We were trying to play as many different combinations of players in there, especially the right side. Seeing Broderick work, left side and right side. We lost the practice up there in Latrobe. That was going to be one of our longer practices. So we're just trying to max it out. Get as many reps as we can with the different combinations because ideally you like to let players lock into a left side, right side. I think it's harder when you make a guy swing left tackle to right tackle. If he can play inside, if he's an inside player that also can play outside, it's advantageous to keep him on left side, right side. So those are the conversations that we're having, and
Coach, do you think the decreased production offensively and defensively could have been also, too, some of the upgraded packages that offensively and defensively that the Jets presented, and also the fact that you guys don't want to reveal too much still at this point in the season?
I don't really view it that way. I think preseason is definitely different. I know it is because I've done this, a few times. I think I can't tell you what their objectives were over there, and I couldn't really tell you how much they, prepared for us. They did a nice job. I thought they, just take the passing game as a whole. We didn't make the contested catches today. We didn't separate, at the breaking points. That's my initial analysis. When we watch the tape and go through it tomorrow, there'll be some things on there that were better than we probably, expected, and there'll definitely be more to clean up this week than last week. I think that's the reality of what happened tonight.
Mike, you mentioned the two interceptions by Will, and one thing you mentioned that you were evaluating was the quarterback's ability to bounce back from adversity.
Yeah.
With Drew specifically, how do you kind of evaluate how he did in those terms?
Yeah, they just to have the chance to look in their eyes, on the sideline. Yeah, I have no concern. So far we've had two opportunities to compete, so they're, they've played at big schools. They both those guys grew up playing quarterback. I don't see any blank in their performance. So they communicate very well. During our process of going over Tom, going through. We go through every picture. Everything's discussed. I can hear the conversations on the headsets. That's what I'm listening to while the defense is out there. So we're getting better at our communication network. This is our second game together. So we need to be. We can be better as a staff. We're working through that. There's things that we did better from week 1 to week 2. I mean, I'm still going through everything. Pre-game, there's a couple of things. Please shut that thing off. I mean, my goodness.
Guys,
So, So that's preseason. But yeah, I wish we'd have performed better tonight. I wish we'd been more productive tonight. Was really my message to the team. So I think just the reality of taking a step as a football team. The scoreboard didn't reflect that, but we got great teaching film. We're a staff that loves to teach, and we'll have a chance. We'll take tomorrow. We're going to treat tomorrow more like the first time we would in season. So tomorrow will be like a Monday. So we'll go through that and clean it up, and then they'll be off, Sunday, and then Monday, Tuesday will be two of our last, training camp practices. So we'll go ahead, really heavy and competitive there, the offense and defense. So wish we would have been more productive today, but we'll definitely have an opportunity to grow.
Mike, I know the offensive line's been getting shuffled a lot, but this team's invested a lot into the O-line, that starting group. What have you seen out of them? It seems like they haven't really had a consistent run presence or consistent pass protection in these first two preseasons.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the consistent run presence, but with that, I think you have to call you got to call it that way too, and that's I'm trying to let two young quarterbacks play more than they had a pretty good leash today. I wasn't playing it close to the vest and trying to beat their defense based on the calls that they were coming in. I love it when they. I love the pressure that they gave us. That's great work for, our front, both the pass pro and the quarterbacks, so, the coverage part of it, the route running and, like I said, the execution, the details of the execution, it was not consistent enough tonight, and it showed up.
You talk about the,
as you mentioned, things don't happen in a vacuum, but with the 2 interceptions for Will, what would be some of your coaching points for him moving forward on those plays?
Well, it's just one mistake leads to two, and it happened on both. It happened on both plays. There's something that went, that wasn't right, and then he's got he played through it last week. He had two things happen to him last week. He played right through it. So sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. So that's a part of playing. It's a shame because I don't recall, but it was a 13-14. It was a hell of a drive that he had established. So both those were big plays in the game that they go the other way. It's I think you're feeling a little differently about his individual performance.
Seemed like a lot of things Drew was doing was extending plays, off-platform stuff. Would it be helpful to see him? I mean, obviously it's good to see that, but would it be helpful to see him be able to have more time in the pocket, and would you consider getting him some earlier reps to try to make that happen?
Well, a healthier run game would have helped him. I think some more runaway routes, on first and second down versus the man would have helped. Once again, there's some play selection based off of, where we are as far as repping our young guys, who's in the game, routes, certain guys ran. So that goes both ways. But I think the fact that he was trusting his feet, trusting his time clock, was sliding through the A and B gaps, those are all quality reps that, he can learn from. So, yeah, he didn't have a lot of, runaway type plays and, a lot of separation and so forth. The penalties, when I think of this second half, the penalties, the first and 20s were, a pretty big factor in the things that, we tried to get done with that group.
You guys had a starting defense out there, or starting group of defense out there, 3 drives.
Mm-hmm.
Was that kind of in response to what you saw on the first drive, or was that something you did?
No, I was trying to get around 20. The goal is to get to about 20 plays with that first group on both sides of the ball.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.